It's also not stated fully that I was recently watching a video. This possible conflicts trigger a potential world war by military TV. So at 3:01, the map shows Thailand, Cambodia, Vietnam. I would surmise that Burma would be either a huge uh, threat or a huge possible interest of location to China, or Burma would side with Thailand, but no, Burma and Thailand obviously no. India might take Burma. India might ally with Burma, and Burma would still fight, but then they would go against possibly the Southeast Asian countries. Malaysia would be allied under the US and may not agree with China. We don't know how it sees. The worst case scenario is that if US fights over Taiwan and they control Taiwan, no doubt they will not let go of Taiwan. They will annex the nation and will be under a vassal state. So far, we've surmised that if Japan was to again to be a key, they will have to choose either China or the US, and most likely the US will be there. But it will also they will also be a huge target for China. India, Pakistan, Iran, Afghanistan, what we are seeing is obviously the consequences of globalization. As more and more borders are increasingly tightened and controlled for the sake of ideologies, race, land control, we therefore tend to think that it wouldn't work that way. See, it wouldn't work in so much as people still recognize their sovereignty over. They recognize their races. They recognize even India themselves. Have many languages. Who knows they will fight among themselves, or who knows they will come together as one to be allied. It's a people. So is China. But we can see the results of globalization throughout the history of China. Europe, however, especially Britain in its own right, is a whole different situation. The majority of the British Empire was once still allied, still controlled by it. New Zealand would still agree with the allies of Britain, because Britain is the mother, of course. I would simply come forth that US is simply a militarized vassal state for Britain, because even though they've done their best to fight for independence, this is not the case. So therefore, NATO and all these things, we're seeing literally possible borders being removed, races being displaced. Will they ever think to say that every race of ethnic tribe, of Mongolia, of all those sorts, will accept being Chinese, Han Chinese, or will every European, Anglo-Saxon race identify itself as British? They would agree that even if we do speak internationally English, because this is mostly about race. It is not, and half is not, about ideologies. No one could ever actually keep up with what democracy really is. And even China could not go full on communist, as Russia have tried. It simply fell from within, because it eventually resorted to feudalism, by capitalist feudalism, and that is what we're seeing today. Because one leader was always so greedy, and if you research the history of China, it wasn't the Communist Party themselves that mostly authorized any kind of conflicts in, civil wars and all that. It was mostly against the civilians and their localized governments. One leader obviously can't do much, but of course a puppet figure is always needed, because that's who you prop up on stage, like superhero films, to divert the attention of what is actually needed, that it is really an issue, a personal issue, down to oneself, not for anybody else, but just the billions of people that need to focus on themselves when they can't and they need a leader. It's impossible to gauge that such an immense topic as of, can billions of people recognize that race is a crucial thing, but you yourselves know when to say that progress is always not made in terms of globalization and language. We know it doesn't work. But apologist from Mall Center has overstated the case that they're pacemakers, they're diplomats, yes. People that love the country for what it is, all that sort of stuff, are not even accepted by their own local people, their own homogenous tribes, or homogenous, races. We tend to think that, like, for example, Japan and China. Japan always sees itself very xenophobically as Japanese, but they themselves got, these haplogroups of DNA related to the Chinese and the yellow people. But they just refuse to admit it, so ultimately it's mass psychology. It is culture that, at the heart, is a problem. Culture may be very, it is significantly as much as, what Noah Yuval says in his book about Homo sapiens, that as much as human culture is contradictory, it is still a necessity. So therefore, one solution to all these, not necessary, one of the solutions that the government has implemented for is they have no worries, new worries, short-term worries about the population, even if they think they do, even if it's presented as a stereotype that the Japanese people are aging population is dying out. They firmly believe that for the young population they'll just come together and all again. This is very troublesome in the sense that it's come like World War II, right? The baby boomer generation. It will always happen in a sense. It's like that. But eventually, the homogeneity, the cultural, the differences in genetics are constantly. The differences are getting less and less, and that's. I don't know. I'm just saying that it's totally unsubstantiated. But the Kashmir border, China is backing Pakistan. But Pakistan and Iran is also, in a sense, like, they could be, most people would think that Iran and Pakistan are close allies, but they could also be enemies. So this is what globalism is. This is the truth. China isn't wrong in the sense that it's trying to achieve homogenization from all tribes, from all groups. They aren't wrong in that case, and democracy couldn't really work. Democracy, we're talking about political versus scientific rhetorics here. Scenarios that cannot be compared because first and foremost, politically, what is politics? Bureaucracy. People with just the means to think what power they have to enact whatever decisions they make, but even these politicians themselves are not rational. They can be controlled. We know they're controlled by money. We know they're controlled by banks. We know they're controlled by corporations that are much, much bigger than governments of today. In only cases, but that's about it. That's some of the insights. U.S. may always try to see that it can be the world's leading superpower, but it's all collapsing from within and from outside. But until then, neither China will succeed in maintaining a stability of their own power if they do not put truth out there. Well, what interest do they have? To say the least, but any empire that comes up is always, it depends on the empire. The most successful one was the US. Looked at how the US turned out. Not very successful. We have to only see the future and allow it to take its course to say, maybe we should let China take Taiwan in order to prevent a global war in which people would be crazy enough they know. But some other experts say that nuclear conflict is much more what is the word for it? Like a scalpel, very, very precise. Nuclear war is getting more precise, and it intends to hit its targets with the minimal loss of population. I do not see it as any time soon. It is that's a case, but it will still affect a lot of things. We must not look just at war, but the economic consequences of it. And I'm not talking about the loss of the economy. I'm talking about the control of the ones who run the economy, the bankers and all that. They will take control. Recently, my work had made an error in the payslip. It was such a huge problem. The payslips, they had an error containing 0 and all that because it was a system malfunction. This alone, I would say, ties into my last video of cashless systems. Such a huge problem. And in foresight, people knew. I don't know why they allow this to happen, but besides that, that's not the main topic of this video. This is just one of the case. This is just one of the outlooks that branched off, from seeing the economy, the consequences and all that. And one of the things is Russia is huge, very huge. But Most of the cities that are surrounded by the border, near the borders, and near Europe. Russia's pretty huge. I'm sure they've got plenty of reasons to also be the next world superpower, and I would say very troubling. They would pretty be brutal in their police tactics, but we don't know. They might achieve a result that could stabilize, but I doubt that. And so it leaves up to Oceania. No, it leaves up to the people. It leaves up to the people to vouch for themselves, not of their leaders, not of anything else, but to raise awareness within themselves, to look within themselves and say, we do not want war. We do not joke about it. The young may do, but we, or even the young, they will fully realize the consequences once war has been played out. Once war has been triggered, World War III has been triggered, only then they will see the consequences of their own decisions, their own inactions, their own actions, their own short-term mind critical thinking, and all the likes that they can possibly achieve. But until then, it is up to us, each and every one of us, to say no to even both of the status quos. But ultimately, the ones who are in luxury will never resign their power to agreeing that they would give up their own lands and their own control. They would never do that. This is ultimately a war between race, not ideologies, and economical differences. Not the disparity between, not the poor and the rich, but that those that seek control and those that seek equilibrium. That is the true nature of the reason for the upcoming war, if it does happen. But ultimately, it has to happen, as much as we do not want it. Maybe the future says it is in store for us. But not because the future says it is in store for us, but because it has been done, manipulated, set in place by a chess game that has been known to the elites, the people who are in charge of, I wouldn't say our world, but of in charge of that we let them. They have, as they say, the insider's knowledge of the elite bloodline. And I heard an insider. He says that, can the birds see the fish? Can the fish see the birds? Totally distinct, separate classes of species. But what we will say is this: war, as much as we agree to all the hatred for race, for differences, it is rather differences, and not just differences. It is rather perspective that we see, that we it can never be the case. It can never be the case. Is our greatest strength, and yet our greatest weakness, and our greatest hate, and the greatest that's what it is, really. But we can always think that whatever chess game they have played out so efficiently for us, it will end. We will rise up and there will be interference, there will be intervention, hopefully extraterrestrially. But if not, maybe it will be spiritual intervention. People will rise up, people will say no, as if they've already done so worldwide on these vaccine passes. We will say no. If we have said no to these vaccine passes, then we will say no to a war. We will not join the army. We will not do what they tell us to do, so that humanity will realize we may not be able to live in peace for all together, but we may not even be able to progressively uplift ourselves to such a, exponentially, to agree on our differences. But we may at least be able to utilize technology efficiently and scientific knowledge to ourselves to help further bridge the gap between ideological, political, racial differences within ourselves and outside of ourselves. We can, it's not always Asians, Western people, Caucasians and all the likes. It's power versus equilibrium. It's haves and have-nots. There's no, the senator Charles, I forgot his name, but the Shooter movie was great. Shooter 2008. There's no sides. There's no Sunnis, no Shiites, no Democrats and Republicans. There's haves and have-nots, and that is the case. And we must bridge the gap between realizing that it's not dichotomy, it's not a binary option that we will have to ally ourselves to which we are, but to ally ourselves to the fact that maybe can we surrender ourselves to time. And ultimately what COVID-19 has done is the best of all social engineering schemes today, associating disease with death, which is of course, but I'm talking about the time and death. COVID-19 has managed to waste most of our time, our lives, in lockdowns and miserable conditions that seem like a holiday, but it's more like a mental, physical lockdown. And it has yearned, it has broken down our will, our hope to say that we will not trust in the government. We will have our independence in ourselves to know that we are safe. Unfortunately, we've been too callous with that, and the people who are mostly haves in the zone, increasingly uprooted by a population of have-nots. They will yearn to always hold the reins, push the control for themselves only, to say no, everything is fine, because it is what my rule is, not yours. And so if we understand this, we will succeed in fighting this whole scheme, this whole inhuman this inhuman dystopia that we really are going too. It is not just China, but it is your own governments against you. And most people won't recognize about that. But most importantly, it is you against others that because of your individuality, your own freedom, uprooted against those who would seek to take control of that individuality. History has shown if we do not agree with our own decisions, if we do not make our own decisions, if we do not emphasize on our own freedoms, no matter how chaotic they may be, someone else is going to make that reality, that own decision for us, and we may not like how we turn it out. We may agree in it, but we will not agree when we are in deep shit. It's like people forcing you to make a trap their way, and you do not know there's a trap. Then they tell you to walk into the trap, not knowingly it is a trap. It is so convincing to see that they tell you whatever it is, it's a trap, but it's for something else. You may trip on it when you realize that you've gotten the direction of where the trap is. That is the case here. I don't know, I don't have many convincing arguments to say about it, but most certainly we are heading into a trap that we've created for ourselves because we've agreed to them. And it's simply just the case. Free will. Everything has free will. Others will enforce mandates on you, but that too is free will of how you choose to say yes or no. Most people have said yes because they think it is not. That would coerce me too, but ultimately we were walking into our own trap. So this is it. This is the final phase. Not the final phase, but a phase that we will have to see where humanity goes to, fall from here.